Matteo had always thought he understood loss, but nothing had ever prepared him for the way Elena clung to him in those final seconds, her breath trembling against his chest as if her body refused to accept what was happening. That moment carved into him long before he could name the pain, long before he understood that every argument they'd ever had been a warning he never listened to. He keeps replaying them, especially the one that started everything. The one where Elena's frustration cracked through her composure and she told him he was becoming someone she didn't recognize. Matteo had answered with coldness he didn't mean, a distance he used like armor because caring for her was already beginning to terrify him. Elena had felt that fear long before he admitted it. She tried to tell herself she didn't care, that Matteo's world couldn't touch her, but every sharp word from him lingered in her chest longer than it should have. She hated how easily he got under her skin, how quickly irritation could twist into something warmer when he softened for even a moment. And he always did, usually when she least expected it. A low, "You don't have to stay angry at me," spoken like a reluctant confession. A glance that lingered too long. A quiet apology slipped between breaths. Those moments left her dizzy with emotions she didn't want, emotions she kept pushing down because wanting Matteo felt dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. Their imbalance only grew the night he told her she needed to stay close to him. No explanation, no negotiation, just a decisive, "You're not leaving my side tonight." Elena felt the resistance rise instantly, but beneath it was something worse. Relief. The admission that she felt safer near him made her furious with herself. She tried to mask it behind sarcasm, but Matteo noticed everything. His gaze stayed on her for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and Elena felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't name but couldn't deny. The hours they spent together after that only pulled them deeper into the quiet gravity they'd both been avoiding. Every emotion seemed louder in the spaces between words. Matteo watched her with attention he wouldn't acknowledge, as if he was expecting her to disappear without warning. Elena caught herself studying the way his expression softened whenever she spoke, and the realization frightened her. She shouldn't have cared. She shouldn't have been affected by a man who lived by rules she didn't believe in, but something about him, his restraint, his rare gentleness, the way he listened when no one else ever had, kept unraveling her defenses, thread by thread. The crack came the moment she found him sitting alone, shoulders tense in a way she rarely saw. She hadn't meant to ask what was wrong, but the words left her before she could bite them back. Matteo looked up with a heaviness she'd never seen in his eyes. The silence stretched, and then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "You're the only thing I can't control." The sentence struck her with a force that made her chest tighten. She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. She hated that he had no idea how deeply that admission cut her, hated even more that a part of her needed to hear it. After that night, the connection between them grew in ways neither could deny. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow, like a breath they didn't realize they'd been holding on to. Their arguments softened into something that felt dangerously close to understanding. Their silences became charged with something that frightened them both. Matteo's protectiveness grew sharper, and Elena's resistance grew weaker. She found herself trusting him without meaning to, leaning into him during the moments she felt unsteady, letting him see parts of her she usually kept locked away. But trust, they learned too late, didn't guarantee safety. The twist hit without warning, so sudden, so cruel that neither had a chance to process it. One moment they were walking together, arguing softly over something insignificant, and the next, Elena felt her body go weak in Matteo's arms. She didn't understand what was happening. She only understood his voice, low, frantic, breaking in a way she had never heard before. Her fingers curled against his chest as if she could anchor herself to him, as if holding on to him could undo the moment unraveling inside her. He kept whispering her name, promising she'd be fine. telling her he was right there. She tried to answer, but the words never reached her lips. When her body fell still, something inside Matteo tore in a way he couldn't hide. He pressed his face against her hair, whispering apologies he had never planned to say, confessing things he had been too afraid to admit while she could still hear him. Every regret came flooding through him. Every argument, every moment he'd pushed her away, every second he'd wasted pretending he wasn't afraid of losing her. By the time he realized the world had gone quiet around him, the only thing he could feel was the hollow ache of a life suddenly stripped of the one person who made him want to be better. In the days that followed, Matteo descended into a darkness Elena had once feared he was capable of. But it wasn't anger that consumed him. It was grief. A grief so deep it left him unraveling behind closed doors, unable to breathe without feeling her absence, crushing him from the inside. He went after everyone responsible, every thread connected to the moment she slipped away. But the revenge didn't ease the ache. It didn't silence the memory of her voice or the feeling of her slipping from his grasp. The more he destroyed, the more he realized he wasn't fighting the world. He was fighting the truth. Revenge wouldn't bring her back. It wouldn't give him the last conversation he never had. It wouldn't erase the look in her eyes the moment she realized she wouldn't get to tell him everything she'd kept hidden. Only then did Matteo understand the brutal, quiet realization that would follow him like a shadow. The world he burned could never compare to the one moment he lost. The moment she died in his arms, believing he didn't love her enough to save her, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to rewrite a moment that could never be undone. Elena tried to convince herself that distance was the only thing that could save her, but the truth pressed harder than she wanted to admit. She wasn't running from Matteo's world. She was running from the way Matteo made her feel, unguarded, exposed, dangerously seen. Every time she tried to step away, Matteo blocked the path without even touching her. A look, a question, a quiet command wrapped in false indifference. Matteo carried concern like a loaded weapon, hidden, disguised, but impossible to ignore. And Elena hid longing inside a cold tone she never meant to sharpen, hoping he wouldn't hear the tremble beneath it. The friction between them grew from everything left unsaid. Each argument was really a plea, each silence an accusation. Matteo pretended he was unaffected, but his voice tightened every time Elena mentioned leaving. And Elena pretended she didn't care, even when the thought of walking away made her feel like she was peeling herself open and leaving pieces behind. Their emotions tangled in the spaces where answers should have been, and the tension wrapped itself around them like something neither knew how to escape. When danger closed in, Matteo's patience shattered. He told Elena she wasn't going anywhere, not now, not with threats circling her name. His tone was steady, but she heard the fear he tried to bury beneath it. Elena argued. Of course she did. But the resistance crumbled when she caught the flicker in Matteo's eyes. Not anger, fear, real fear. And the weight of it disarmed her more than any weapon ever could. Days under his watch turned the air between them into a quiet battlefield. Matteo tried to hide how much he noticed. Every tremor in her breathing, every moment she drifted too far away in thought. And Elena tried to ignore the way his presence made her heartbeat shift, steadying and quickening at once. Their tension softened in moments neither meant to create. Late nights when exhaustion stripped Matteo's defenses, and he let pieces of old wounds slip out between breaths. He spoke of things he once vowed never to reveal, things soaked in regret and buried grief. Elena didn't interrupt. She just listened, and somehow that was the thing that broke him the most gently. Sometimes their eyes met mid-argument, and neither looked away quickly enough. Something unspoken stretched between them, fragile and terrifying. Elena felt herself leaning toward him in ways she had no right to. Matteo found himself memorizing the sound of her voice, even when she was angry. Their connection grew from attention, neither planned, forming in stolen glances and half-finished sentences, threads weaving before either noticed the pattern. But closeness always sharpens the cost, and the twist came without warning, ripping through the fragile calm they were finally learning to share. A betrayal from inside Matteo's own circle, a face he trusted, a voice he should have heard cracking sooner. The shot wasn't meant for Elena, but it reached her anyway, cutting through the moment they were both on the verge of admitting something they weren't ready to name. The world snapped apart in an instant. Matteo reached for her just as she collapsed into his arms, her breath slipping away like something stolen. Elena felt the cold before the darkness. Matteo felt everything else. He called her name like the word itself could anchor her to the present, like he could force the world to bend if he just held her tightly enough. But her body softened with unbearable stillness, and his voice broke in a way he didn't understand until it was too late. She slipped out of consciousness with a whisper of his name on her lips, and Matteo realized the sound would haunt him more deeply than any past sin ever had. Separation was no longer emotional. It was literal. Elena gone from his arms, leaving a silence he had no idea how to survive. Matteo's world folded inward, collapsing under the weight of a loss he was never prepared to face. He had always known how to rebuild power, rebuild empires, rebuild himself, but nothing taught him how to rebuild a life without her in it. The emptiness she left behind hollowed him out, piece by piece, until all that remained was the truth he'd spent months refusing to see. The realization came like a slow, aching burn. Losing Elena wasn't about losing someone he cared for. Losing Elena meant losing the last thread that tied him to any softness left in him. She was the quiet voice he didn't know he needed, the ache he pretended not to feel, the future he never allowed himself to imagine. Without her, every breath felt heavier, every hour sharper. He turned the world to ashes, searching for any path that could lead her back to him. Not out of vengeance, though it would have been simpler, but because without Elena, Matteo finally understood what it meant to be truly alone. Not the kind of loneliness built from empty rooms, the kind built from losing the person who made you human. Matteo felt the doubt before Elena ever spoke it. It lived in the way she hesitated before answering him, the way her breath caught when he reached for her, the way her eyes softened and then immediately shut themselves down. She thought she was hiding it, but Matteo felt every shift in her like a bruise pressed by accident, and Elena felt trapped between wanting him and fearing everything that came with him, especially the part of his life she pretended she didn't see. Their friction started the way storms often do, quiet at first, almost invisible. Elena questioned decisions he made in anger, asked why he always chose force over patience, why he couldn't trust anyone long enough to let things settle, and Matteo hated that her voice carried weight inside him. He hated that she could make him reconsider with a single look. He hated it because he cared, and caring had always been a weakness he wasn't allowed to have. So emotional resistance became the wall they built between themselves. Elena stopped asking questions she feared hearing the answers to. Matteo stopped offering explanations he feared would make her walk away. She avoided intimacy because loving him felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. He avoided honesty because telling her the truth felt like pushing her off it. But everything shifted the moment danger curled around her name. Matteo didn't announce it. He simply appeared, jaw tense, eyes carrying something she couldn't ignore. "You're staying with me," he said, and it wasn't a request. Elena pushed back immediately. "I'm not yours to move around." Matteo's voice dropped. "Someone out there thinks you're leverage. You think I'm letting you walk out there alone?" She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was tired of living in the shadows of things she wasn't allowed to understand. But his fear was right there, just under the surface. The fear he would never admit, never name out loud, and something inside her softened despite every reason not to. Forced closeness made tension inevitable. Nights stretched long, filled with arguments that started from nothing and ended with both of them breathing too quickly. Elena told herself she wasn't affected by him watching her. Matteo told himself he didn't care that she kept looking away first. But the cracks formed anyway. One night, after another argument where Elena accused him of making decisions out of anger, Matteo finally let a truth slip through the armor he spent years building. "You think I want any of this?" he said, voice quiet, stripped of the sharpness he usually used as protection. "I'm trying to keep you alive, Elena. I'm trying, and I don't even know how to do this without making you hate me." Her breath wavered, and she didn't know what to do with the ache that spread through her chest. Matteo wasn't supposed to admit things like that. He wasn't supposed to look that fragile, not in front of her. The next crack appeared when she found him sitting in the dark, hands trembling in a way he would never allow anyone else to see. "I'm fine," he said immediately, eyes refusing to meet hers. Elena didn't believe him for a second, and for the first time, she didn't walk away. She stayed quietly, long enough for him to eventually whisper the fear he had been swallowing whole. "If something happens to you, I don't know what I become." She didn't touch him. She didn't speak. But she stayed close enough that he felt her presence, and something inside him steadied. It terrified him more than anything else. Their connection grew in the moments they didn't intend. The way she lingered a little too long when he brushed past her. The way he watched her when she pretended not to notice. The way silence between them no longer felt cold but frighteningly warm. Matteo started seeing pieces of his future every time he looked at her, and Elena started seeing the man he tried so hard to hide. But the twist came with a clarity that destroyed everything. The threat he'd been guarding her from finally surfaced, too fast, too close, too soon, and Matteo realized he wouldn't reach her in time. A split second, a breath, a step he couldn't stop. Elena moved first. She stepped between him and the danger without hesitation, without thought, without anything except instinct. "Matteo," she said softly, and then her knees buckled. His hands caught her before her body hit the floor, and the moment he felt her weight collapse into him, something inside Matteo tore open so violently he couldn't breathe. Elena's fingers curled weakly against his chest, and the sound of her exhale felt like the world cracking. "Stay with me," Matteo whispered, a plea that shook more than any command he had ever given. "Elena, look at me." Her eyes tried. They really tried, but the strength wasn't there. "Why would you do that?" Matteo choked out, voice breaking. "Why would you choose me?" Elena's lips moved, the faintest shape of an answer. "Because you forget you're human. Someone has to remember." He felt her slipping, felt her drifting, and Matteo held her as if he could anchor her soul with his hands alone. "No, not like this. Elena, please." Her breathing faded before the sentence could finish. Matteo didn't remember how long he stayed there. Minutes, hours, an eternity suspended in the moment he couldn't undo. Her name left his mouth like a prayer, shattered into a scream. And when the realization finally hit that she was gone, that her love had been the shield that saved him, something inside him turned to dust. Separation wasn't just physical. It was the hollow echo she left behind, the sudden silence where her arguments once lived, the absence of the one person who made him believe there was a version of him worth saving. Matteo walked through the following days like a man made of broken glass, sharp and empty at the same time. He didn't seek revenge, not at first. He sought a way to bring her back, even if it meant burning through every ally, every line he swore he would never cross. His world became a graveyard of decisions driven by a grief he couldn't outrun, and the realization hit him with merciless precision. Loving Elena hadn't been the mistake. letting her near his world had been, but it was too late to undo, too late to protect her, too late to tell her the things he only learned after losing her. And Matteo, a man who once feared becoming a monster, found himself standing in the ruins of everything he'd tried to keep from her, knowing the only thing he truly lost was the one love he could never protect. Matteo felt the crack long before it ever shattered him. It lived in the way Elena avoided his eyes whenever he asked her to stay, and in the way she whispered his name like it carried both safety and danger. She was always trying to outrun something, maybe him, maybe herself. Matteo could never decide which truth terrified him more. All he knew was that every time Elena stepped back, something inside him pulled forward with twice the force, like losing her was not a possibility but a prophecy written into his bones. Elena felt the imbalance too. She felt it in the way Matteo's voice dropped when he was angry, not because he wanted to scare her, but because he was terrified she'd walk away if he raised it. She felt it in the frustration lodged in her chest whenever he demanded a loyalty she didn't know how to give. "You act like I owe you promises," she once said, turning from him even though she felt his hurt like a hand closing around her ribs. Matteo muttered something sharp in return, something he regretted the second it left him, but Elena had already flinched, already retreated behind the walls she used as armor. The friction only grew from everything they didn't say. Matteo tried to mask fear with control. Elena tried to mask longing with distance. And somewhere between his intensity and her silence, the fragile thing between them frayed. It snapped. The night danger finally touched her. Matteo didn't ask her to stay. He didn't negotiate. He simply told her, voice low and unshakable, "You're not leaving. Not now." Elena tried to argue, but the tremor in her voice gave her away, and Matteo caught it instantly. That single crack in her tone scattered him. "Elena," he said softer, "I'm not letting you walk into something you don't understand." She hated how her chest tightened at the sound of her name. She hated how badly she wanted to trust him, even knowing trust meant surrendering the last illusion of distance she still had. But she stayed. And Matteo could feel the shift in the air, not peace, not safety, but a tension so sharp it almost felt like confession. Forced closeness turned every quiet moment into something charged. Elena felt it when Matteo brushed past her, when he stood a breath too close, when he asked if she'd eaten like it was a prayer and not a question. Matteo felt it when she avoided his eyes, when she snapped to cover fear, when she whispered "good night," like she hoped he wouldn't hear the tremble. The more she tried to hide, the more he saw. The night vulnerability finally slipped out of her was the night she couldn't hold the walls anymore. They were arguing, again over the danger, over his protectiveness, over the way he insisted she mattered more than she believed she should. And then Elena's voice broke. "I'm terrified, Matteo," she whispered. "Not of your world, of what you're becoming in my life." The words cut him open. Matteo had always believed he was the danger, the threat, the thing she should fear. Hearing that it wasn't him but her own heart shattered something he'd kept locked for years. He reached out, fingers barely touching her arm, like she might vanish if he pressed too hard. "Elena," he breathed, "I don't know how to be gentle with anything except you." Her eyes softened. Just for a moment. Just long enough for him to see the truth she never said aloud, that she wanted him, even if wanting him was the most dangerous choice she could make. After that night, their connection grew in small, trembling ways. Elena started staying close without realizing it. Matteo watched her with a softness he couldn't hide. They argued less, or maybe the arguments simply turned into something quieter, something filled with unspoken confessions neither knew how to voice. Matteo felt hope for the first time in a long time. Elena felt fear brewed with longing, and she hated how much she needed him near. But for once, she let herself have it. let herself breathe beside him, let herself believe he could be hers without consequence. The universe didn't wait long to break that illusion. The ambush came in a blink, too fast for thought, too cruel for mercy. There wasn't time for fear, barely time for breath. Matteo turned the moment instinctively, shielding Elena with his body. But Elena made a choice he never expected, a choice that would unmake him forever. She stepped into the path meant for him. One heartbeat, one mistake, one whispered, "Matteo," before she collapsed into his arms. Everything inside him broke at once. He held her like she was life itself, like he could force the world to rewind if he only held her tight enough. "Stay with me," he begged, voice shaking with a terror he'd spent his life pretending he didn't feel. "Elena, please, I'm right here. I'm here." Her breaths were thin, slipping through his fingers like sand. Elena lifted trembling hands to his face, as if memorizing him in the seconds she had left. "I wasn't afraid," she whispered. "Not when it was you." Then her eyes closed. Matteo's world ended with them. The separation was immediate, violent. One moment she was warm, the next she was gone, leaving Matteo holding the ghost of every promise they'd never spoken. He broke in silence, the kind that destroys men from the inside. People touched his shoulder, spoke to him, tried to pull him away, but Matteo didn't hear anything except her last breath, replaying over and over like an echo he couldn't escape. Grief hollowed him. Rage poisoned what was left. He stopped sleeping. He stopped listening. He stopped being human in every way that mattered. Matteo became a man unmoored, unrestrained, unmerciful, unrecognizable even to himself. He told himself it was vengeance. He told himself he was hunting the ones responsible. But somewhere in the wreckage of his mind, Matteo knew the truth. He was trying to destroy the world because he couldn't bear living in one she no longer breathed in. It wasn't revenge he needed. It was reversal. Every choice he made after her death was a descent into madness, softened only by the memory of her voice. Elena had once told him he was dangerous. Matteo now understood she had been wrong. He wasn't dangerous. He was ruin. And the moment he truly broke was the moment he realized what he had become without her. A man shaped only by emptiness, driven only by the impossible desire to rewrite the second she slipped away. Elena had loved him despite the darkness. Matteo was willing to burn the world if it gave him even a chance to bring her back. Elena had never felt so fragile, yet so dangerously alive in Matteo's presence. Every attempt to step back, to protect herself from the storm that was his world, collided with the unyielding force of his insistence. "You can't leave," he would say, the words edged with something sharper than command, something that cut straight to her chest. She wanted to argue, to insist she could survive without being tethered to him, but the sight of his eyes, dark and burning, stole the air from her lungs. There was frustration, yes, and irritation, but beneath it, there was care. She could neither deny nor trust. And every time she tried to convince herself she had the upper hand, Matteo would pierce through her walls with a quiet, relentless gaze, and she would feel the first stirrings of a need she hated to admit. She hated how much his attention unsettled her, how it made her question the boundaries she had so carefully constructed. Their interactions were electric, each conversation a battlefield of logic versus desire. Elena sharpened her words, trying to keep distance, while Matteo countered with patience that masked the raw fear of losing her. Arguments simmered into tension-filled silences where neither dared to speak what hovered in the air. A simple glance became a confession she couldn't voice aloud. Every time Matteo pulled her into his inner circle, claiming protection, she felt both trapped and inexplicably safe, her pulse betraying her composure. She hated the way her heart beat faster when his hand brushed hers, when his voice softened just enough to make her question why she resisted. She wanted to fight it, to remain untouchable, but the truth whispered through every involuntary heartbeat. She was already caught in him. The nights brought a different kind of closeness. Elena would find herself lingering near him, feigning indifference while her mind replayed every subtle sign of care. Matteo would admit things in the quiet hours, confessions he swore to never speak aloud, and each word shredded the barriers between them. "No one has ever mattered as much," he confessed once, and she could only close her eyes, wishing she could shrink her feelings into something safer. The vulnerability was mutual, though unspoken. Elena admitted in fragments that she felt safer with him than anywhere else, even as fear clawed at her, warning her against dependence. Each revelation, each tremor in their conversation drew them closer, their connection a fragile thread woven through fear, desire, and an unspoken need to protect each other. And yet the world outside their fragile cocoon remained a relentless threat, reminding them that nothing was safe and nothing would last. The moment of rupture arrived like a storm breaking. Betrayal came not from her, but from the world Matteo had tried to shield her from. An explosion ripped through the air, a brutal punctuation that left her body collapsing into his arms. Elena whispered, barely audible over the chaos, "I'm sorry." And the words were a dagger through his heart. Rage, shock, and grief collided in a way that made him forget everything except the small, fading warmth of her in his arms. She had been his world in miniature, and now she was gone, leaving him with nothing but the hollow echo of her presence. He shook her, whispered her name, cursed the unfairness, but the truth was immutable. The love he had fought to protect was slipping from his grasp, and he could do nothing to hold it. In the silence that followed, Matteo realized the depth of what he had lost. Elena had never doubted him. She had only feared the danger he carried. The guilt he had carried for attempting to pull her into his perilous orbit now morphed into a fury so potent it threatened to consume everything. He understood that his world, his empires, his alliances, they were all meaningless if they could not protect the one soul that had mattered above all else. The revelation tore through him with a painful clarity. His love for her had been complete, but he had underestimated the fragility of life and the immediacy of the danger surrounding them. His grief was sharp, a living thing that clawed at him from the inside, refusing to let him rest, refusing to let him see any path forward that did not involve her. And in that understanding, his humanity cracked. Matteo's response was a tempest. He broke rules he had never considered bending, dismantled alliances that had taken years to construct, and pursued vengeance not for himself, but for the chance to reclaim her, any fragment of her essence that might still exist. The world became a blur of strategy, manipulation, and raw, aching obsession. Every heartbeat reminded him of her absence, and every breath carried the memory of her last words. Yet beneath the rage, a sliver of hope persisted, a fragile tendril that whispered that she had trusted him until the very end, and that trust was a flame worth chasing, worth burning the world to honor. He moved with a single-minded devotion, propelled by grief, love, and the relentless certainty that nothing could ever compare to losing her again. Even in the midst of destruction, Matteo's mind returned to the moments that had defined them. Her sharp retorts in arguments, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't noticing, the nights they shared in stolen intimacy where vulnerability hung between them like fragile glass. Every memory was a shard of longing, a reminder that love had been the only thing worth risking everything for. And now, without her, the world had grown colder, emptier, more dangerous, and yet he carried the weight of her presence in every decision, every plan, every act of rebellion against the life that had stolen her. Her last breath had not only changed him, it had unmade him, leaving him simultaneously hollow and fully alive in the terrifying, obsessive space that only grief and love could occupy. And as he faced the impossible task of reclaiming her, Matteo understood one immutable truth. Nothing else mattered if she was not at the center of it, and nothing would stop him from trying to bring her back, even if the world itself had to burn. This was a Matteo remade by loss, driven by love, consumed by grief, and haunted by the unshakable imprint of Elena's last words, "I'm sorry." And somewhere within that sorrow, a fire had been lit that would not be extinguished until he had done the impossible, until she was no longer gone. Elena had convinced herself that distance was the only way to survive Matteo's world. Every glance, every subtle gesture from him was a reminder of how dangerously close she had come to letting her heart speak its truth, and she had fought it fiercely. She had questions he never wanted to answer, challenges he never wanted to face, and yet every deflection, every terse word from Matteo only drew her closer into the storm he embodied. She told herself it was caution, that she was protecting herself, but deep inside she felt the pull of something she could not resist. Matteo, in turn, hid behind sharp retorts and a cold precision that barely concealed the worry etched into his every glance. He hated that she mattered so much that the thought of losing her clawed at him even as he masked it with frustration. Every interaction was a battle of wills. Her need to resist him and his refusal to let her go. A collision that left both hearts raw and exposed. She pushed, he deflected, and yet neither could deny the current of attraction that surged beneath every argument, every word unspoken. Threats inched closer, tangible and unrelenting, and Matteo refused to allow her to step back any further. He drew her into his inner circle, pulling her into the gravity of his life with an intensity that was impossible to resist. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice low but unwavering. And in that moment, Elena felt the cage close around her, a cage she simultaneously despised and secretly craved. Their proximity sparked a tension neither could ignore. In whispered arguments and fleeting touches, in the moments when his hand nearly brushed hers before recoiling, every small interaction became a confession neither dared voice. She fought the pull, tried to convince herself that she could maintain control, but Matteo's presence was relentless. His eyes lingered too long, his words carried too much weight, and every heartbeat she tried to ignore reminded her that she wanted him as much as he wanted her. Yet both clung to denial, a fragile shield against the vulnerability threatening to topple them. Vulnerability arrived like a tremor, neither could stop. Matteo's voice, rough with the weight of unsaid fears, finally broke through her defenses. "Losing you would destroy me," he admitted, the words hanging between them like a confession of every hidden truth. Elena's chest tightened, resolve crumbling as her own defenses collapsed. She wanted to argue, to deny the truth of her feelings, but the quiver in her voice betrayed her. I don't know if I can stay," she whispered, her words faltering under the gravity of what she felt, and Matteo's reaction was both terrifying and beautiful. He didn't scold, didn't argue. He simply let the truth settle, letting them both feel the raw weight of their connection. In that shared silence, the walls around their hearts cracked just enough to allow the faintest flicker of trust, of hope, of longing to slip through. The pull between them intensified, fragile and breathtaking, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them, and everything else ceased to matter. Their connection deepened in moments both tender and fraught. Every look, every hesitant brush of hands became a declaration of a bond they couldn't articulate aloud. Elena found herself staying longer, lingering in his presence despite the danger she knew surrounded them. Matteo's gaze softened in moments he never intended her to see, revealing the parts of him he usually kept locked away. Their proximity became a conversation in itself, silent yet devastatingly loud, a push and pull that neither could resist. She felt herself unraveling in ways she didn't want to, feeling safe yet exposed, knowing that the one person she wanted to protect her was also the one whose world she could never fully enter without risking everything. And just as they teetered on the edge of something irrevocable, the moment shattered. The ambush came with brutal inevitability. Elena was caught in the crossfire, a split second of chaos ripping her from his arms. Matteo screamed her name, the sound raw and desperate as her body collapsed against him. Her hand, so small in his, trembled once before going still, and her eyes, shining with fear and trust, met his one last time. "Matteo," she whispered, and that single breath broke him. Rage, disbelief, grief, they all surged at once, leaving him hollow, his world stripped of every certainty except the unbearable absence of her. He held her, whispering apologies he knew could not reach her, begging her to stay even though he knew the answer. The heartbreak consumed him, burning through his soul, leaving only a man fractured, undone, and unrecognizable. In the aftermath, Matteo's realization came slowly, painfully. Every wall he had built, every rule he had followed, every loyalty he had valued, it all crumbled in the absence of Elena. She had never doubted his love, never questioned his intentions. She had only feared the peril he carried, and now that fear had been realized in the cruelest way. The man who had ruled with precision and control was gone, replaced by someone raw, broken, and driven by the single need to undo the moment she had slipped away. Each heartbeat reminded him of what he had lost. Each breath carried the memory of her presence, and every thought circled around the weight of her absence. He understood, finally, that nothing mattered except the chance to restore her, to reclaim even a fragment of what had been stolen. Matteo's world, once ordered and impenetrable, dissolved into chaos. He tore apart alliances, defied rules, and shattered empires with a single-minded obsession. Revenge alone was insufficient. It could not heal the fracture in his heart. Every plan, every action, every whispered command carried the weight of Elena's memory, of her trust, and of the love that had consumed him completely. His humanity had fractured, but within the ruins of his heart, a fire burned, fueled by grief, obsession, and the undying certainty that nothing would matter if he could not restore the last piece of her in his life. And so Matteo moved forward, unbound by law, loyalty, or fear, driven by the echo of her last words and the irreplaceable warmth of her presence. Her death had broken the dawn, but it had also forged something irreversible. A man whose every thought, every breath, and every heartbeat would be claimed by the memory of the woman who had changed him with a single, fleeting breath. Elena's life had ended in his arms, but in his grief, obsession, and love, she remained eternal. A force that would shape every choice he made until the impossible was made real, until she was no longer lost to him. Elena had always believed that keeping Matteo at a distance was the only way to survive him and herself. His eyes followed her constantly, memorizing every line of her face, every twitch of hesitation, and she fought to remain unclaimed, even when the pull between them was undeniable. Their friction was a quiet, simmering storm. Small arguments that left the air taut, silences heavy with unspoken truths, the way she refused to look at him when her heart betrayed her, and the way he let his gaze linger too long, as if daring her to fall. Each encounter was a battle of restraint and desire, both of them circling the edges of a connection they couldn't name aloud, yet neither could deny. Elena told herself she needed to leave, that she couldn't let herself be pulled into the chaos that defined his life. And Matteo, in turn, masked his fear of losing her with a sharpness that stung. Her resistance fed his obsession, and his obsession shredded her defenses in ways she never anticipated. Danger made proximity inevitable, and Matteo refused to allow her to leave, pulling her into the gravity of his life with an intensity that brooked no refusal. Every touch was accidental, yet charged. Every word spoken in passing laced with layers of meaning neither dared articulate. Elena felt herself unraveling in moments when she tried to stand firm, when he would murmur her name in ways that made her pulse stutter. When the simplest look from him could ignite a storm she wasn't ready to face. She hated the helplessness that bloomed inside her, hated how much she wanted him even as she told herself she could not. Matteo, for his part, could not stop himself, could not stop the way his heart tightened whenever she was near, the way his thoughts consumed her presence, replaying moments he could not reach with words. Their interactions were a constant push and pull, a dance of deflection and confession, and every silent second between them was a battlefield of emotion neither could escape. Vulnerability appeared in the quietest of moments, in the tremor of Elena's voice when she whispered, "I hate how much I care," the admission slipping out before she could cage it. Matteo's breath hitched, his heart raw in response, and he leaned closer, voice low, steady, unflinching. "Then don't stop," he said, a command and a plea wrapped into one. Her chest ached at the truth in his words, and for a fleeting moment the walls she had so meticulously built crumbled. She wanted to fight it, to maintain her distance, but the admission had opened a door that could no longer be closed. Their connection deepened, fragile and trembling, tethered to the unspoken promise that neither dared to name, yet both felt in every shared glance, every lingering touch, every heartbeat that seemed impossibly synchronized. They lingered on that edge, caught between fear and desire, until the twist arrived with merciless force. A hit meant for Matteo came without warning, shattering the tenuous safety they had built. Elena's scream tore through him as she collapsed into his arms, every ounce of life leaving her too quickly, leaving only the sound of her whispering his name. Matteo's hand shook as he pressed her to him, desperate to keep her, desperate to rewrite the moment, to will her back from the brink. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met his one last time, and he felt the world collapse beneath him. He murmured promises he had never dared to make to anyone, words born of panic and love, and yet they could not save her. The weight of loss crashed over him, suffocating and absolute, leaving nothing but raw, searing grief. In the wake of her death, Matteo was a man unmade. Every rule he had followed, every line he had never crossed, became meaningless. He screamed in silence at the injustice, at the impossibility of losing her, at the sheer cruelty of fate. Her absence consumed him, each breath a reminder of what had been stolen, each heartbeat a hollow echo of her presence. The man who had commanded worlds, who had bent others to his will, found himself powerless against the void she left behind. He understood finally that losing Elena was not just losing a person, it was losing the only future he had ever truly wanted, the only possibility of a life that mattered beyond power, beyond fear, beyond survival. Matteo's grief turned to an obsession that would brook no compromise. Alliances, laws, boundaries, everything that had once defined him as untouchable now became irrelevant. He tore through the remnants of his carefully controlled life with a singular focus, determined to rewrite the moment, to reclaim Elena, to defy the world itself if it meant bringing her back. Rage, sorrow, and undying love fused into a force that left him unrecognizable to anyone who had ever known him. Every action, every plan, every whispered command carried the echo of her voice, the memory of her touch, the desperate certainty that nothing else mattered. Elena's final breath had changed him, broken the man, and rebuilt him as something far more dangerous, far more relentless. Matteo moved forward with the certainty that he would not accept fate, that he would burn the laws of men and the rules of the world to reclaim what had been lost. In every calculated step, in every confrontation, in every act of fury and grief, he carried her memory as both armor and weapon. The love that had seemed too strong to survive now became the fire that would consume everything standing between him and the impossible. A future where Elena was no longer gone. A future he would force into existence even if it meant destroying the world to make it happen.